Well, Browns fans, you have 6 new members of the Cleveland Browns to talk about, think about, get ready to see playing on Sundays, Mondays, Thursdays, maybe even Saturdays next fall. And we're excited to talk about it with you. It's Spencer German, Cole McDaniel for Browns Digest or si.com/NFL/Browns. We have had your coverage all weekend, both from Berea and remotely from other areas, and just kind of covering this entire thing in its entirety. All kinds of great stuff, content-wise, information on all the picks. Because I know as the rounds get later, like they did on this Saturday, it's hard to kind of know a lot of information about some of these guys. So Cole did a tremendous job putting some of those together, breaking it down for you, and we've had great coverage over there. So be sure to check it out. But in the meantime, Cole, let's start specifically. We've had a chance to kind of touch on each night of the draft and what we saw sort of play out in relation to the Browns specifically today. What did you think of the 4 picks that they made? The names, by the way, for everybody watching: Jamari Thrash, wide receiver out of Louisville, was their 5th-round pick. Nathaniel Watson, their 6th-round pick, linebacker out of Mississippi State, who also could be a special teamer for them. Miles Harden, cornerback out of South Dakota, and Juwan Briggs, defensive tackle out of Cincinnati, rounds things out. I also thought Cole was pretty interesting that the Browns didn't trade any picks this year. They stayed where they were. They stayed where they were sort of slotted and made no moves. And Andrew Berry talked about that a little bit. I think it's the first time they haven't made at least one trade during the draft, which I thought was also kind of interesting. But just your overall thoughts on day 3 of the Browns Hall of players that they got.
Well, Spencer, going into this draft, you and I talked about the Browns having the luxury with how good their roster is on paper right now to not really have needs for 2024 for the most part. When they were going to be drafting, it's going to be for 2025 and beyond. So we knew coming into this draft, it was probably going to be more of a boring draft from a Browns standpoint. In that it was, Andrew Berry, his front office, they decided to sit back. They didn't make any trades, as you mentioned. They were just content to, I'm sure they probably called around, but they were content to just take guys where they did. I was really happy with day 2. I understand some of the picks for day 3. Maybe not as happy. There's certainly some concerns in some certain spots, and like taking 2 defensive tackles in the same draft. There's only so much room you can have on a 53-man roster. I don't know if you can carry 7 defensive tackles, right? So, the last pick in round 7, Briggs, great stand-up guy. I like his physicality. I like him. But does that mean Siaki Ika's headed out the door? Is Briggs going to be on the practice squad? What's the plan there? I certainly thought they could have looked towards tight end at that spot instead of defensive tackle or another position. The Jamari Thrash thing, just to touch on that really quick. I understand why they take a wide receiver. Again, that's usually a deeper room that you want to have because sometimes they're carrying 6 guys. Maybe they even sneak 7 in at wide receiver. But ultimately, I don't see Thrash in year 1 getting playing time ahead of Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, David Bell, and Cedric Tillman. I think he probably already slots in as that 6th guy. He has some good intangibles when it comes to his quickness, his acceleration in short area, but he's got to put on more muscle. I think he's got to add more strength in order to compete at the next level. He has the versatility on the outside or inside, so that's why they liked him, but I don't think he's ready yet. 2025 maybe. Again, it may knock Prochester, it may knock Michael Woods out of contention, but Thrash, I don't expect to see him much in 2024 either.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up Thrash. I guess it's not funny you bring him up, but you bring up Thrash, and I think it points to something I've been preaching throughout this pre-draft process, which is Andrew Berry is always going to draft a wide receiver. He's done it now. Once again, he takes one. Another position that he tends to gravitate towards is defensive backs. The Miles Harden pick represents him doing that again this year. So those are 2. They talk about premium positions all the time, Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski. And I think it's pretty obvious at this point that at this time of year, they view those 2 positions especially as premium positions. And they stockpiled a lot of different guys and a lot of different talents on this roster at those 2 positions, especially with what they're kind of coming away with here in the draft. And I do think it's interesting you bring up, like, what does it mean for the wide receiver room? Who can realistically still be on this roster at that position, knowing that you now have somebody else coming in Thrash And I wonder if one of these other young guys, David Bell potentially, I doubt they give up on Cedric Tillman, but it's some added competition for those guys. So somebody here is going to probably get the short end of the stick and be on the outside looking in once training camp comes to a close. I can't blame them for, I guess, doing it. Like it doesn't hurt to take more bites at the apple and try to get more wide receivers. But it's just going to be interesting to see how that specifically plays out throughout the spring and the summer.
Yeah, and I think the best pick maybe of all the picks today, and probably why it happened is because I really thought the Browns may have gone for in the fifth round Jeremiah Trotter Jr. and the Eagles trade up one pick ahead, and then that's how that thrash pick happens. Obviously, I don't think we'll ever fully know what happened.
I tried to get that question in, by the way. I don't know if you saw, but I sort of did it in a joking way, like, hey, was there a little brotherly intuition there that he knew maybe you guys were interested, and he just kind of laughed it off and said, no, I wish there was a better story there. I still believe that there
Yeah.
was something to that. I think there had to be something where they thought that the Browns are going to take Jeremiah Trotter Jr., and so they traded up.
Yeah, they're never going to tell us that, but it just felt like it was trending that way. But they bounced back in round 6, taking Nathaniel Watson, and he's a physical Mike linebacker who's really good downhill against the run or as a blitzer as well. Him learning behind Jordan Hicks, I think, is going to be a really good thing because I
Yeah.
think he's a lot of the similar traits of Hicks. And then he's also going to be able to add an impact in kick coverage on special teams probably here in the first year as well, when the new kickoff rules mean that there's probably a chance now for some actual returns, which we hadn't been seeing. And obviously, you want to have guys who can tackle and can make something happen on that end and make sure that field position is not, I guess, putting your defense in a bad spot initially. So that's going to help with Watson.
Yeah.
The Harden pick, I understand why they're going defensive back there. I think he's going to be another one to compete on special teams. They don't necessarily need a corner. But again, there's at least upside for him and special teams value. So those two probably made the most sense of the 4 picks today for me at the beginning of the 7th round and then in the 6th round as well.
Yeah, I think the Watson pick is interesting because for a couple of reasons. Led the SEC in tackles last year. I think that sort of says something. He's a bigger guy, very, very strong. And I think with the new kickoff rule, and Barry was kind of asked about this, how he was a big special teamer at Mississippi State as well. How he plays into that part of the equation, I think, is going to be interesting to see as well, because I think he's going to be a special teamer for them for sure. But as we go through this list and we kind of think big picture on how the entire weekend went, one thing you notice, Cole, that jumps off the page, a lot of emphasis on defense. And this is a team that last year, I mean, their defense was number one in the NFL in a number of different categories. And it was pretty much them in Baltimore, 1-2 in most of those things. But they're not really resting on their laurels. They're trying to add depth. They're trying to add pieces. I think it also gives you some insight into how they feel about the state of the offense as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I understand why they're going defense. Like I said, one of those things where nothing against Briggs either, because I think personality wise and I think his ability, yeah, he could be a great pick. It's just a matter of they have so many guys in that room. What are you going to do? Where I still think they could use another tight end. I still think that they could use a running back there in that room. And for me, a couple guys that I was super high on were sitting there. And Dallin Holker of Colorado State ends up being an undrafted free agent and goes to New Orleans. I thought he would have been great there. Also sitting on the board for quite a long time was tight end Jaheim Bell of Florida State too. So those were two guys who really could have helped out in the tight end room. It sounds like tight end may be a position that Andrew Berry and company, they're still wanting to do something with. That's at least what it sounded like from the press conference. And I thought there were a couple good ones available late, but they decided not to do that. And then Cody Schrader, who's one of my favorite running backs in this class, somehow he goes
Kyle
undrafted.
Shanahan is going to turn him into a star. We already know.
And he goes to the San Francisco 49ers. There's always an undrafted free agent every single year at running back that makes a name for themselves. And Cody Schrader just fit into a great scheme. He's an excellent running back. And I would have loved to have seen the Browns pick him up maybe at the end of the 7th round or as an undrafted free agent. Obviously, it doesn't end up happening, but he's a guy to watch out for who didn't get selected.
Yeah, I think that those are some good names you mentioned, and I do think the tight end position is an interesting one. There was a lot of smoke around them looking at tight ends, bringing in tight ends on top 30 visits, so I was kind of surprised they didn't end up going that route. I think part of it was just how the board sort of fell at that position specifically. But there were a number of guys that were still out there for a while that I thought maybe they could play up to get or wait and maybe draft, and it didn't end up happening. So that was kind of surprising. But an area that Barry might still be looking to do some tweaking. I think they will probably look to do some tweaking, especially after losing Harrison Bryant in free agency. So uh, overall thoughts, Cole. If I'm not big on like giving out draft grades. I think it's one of the silliest things you do because it's like, how can we really grade these players until we know what they're going to be at the next level and they play a couple of years? But just your overall bird's eye view on this draft as a whole. How do you feel about, did the Browns have a successful weekend in terms of filling some of those gaps in depth areas that they were trying to address, or did they leave something to be desired in your opinion?
I think, and it's good to know, by the way, Spencer, I'll handle the draft grade story then. I won't let you do it. But I
Well,
would say
yeah,
that
I would be doing it very spitefully the entire time, so don't make me.
day two, I was very happy with. I think they did a
Yeah,
great job with day two. Mike Hall Jr. and Zach Zinter, I think, were excellent pickups. Um, Day three, I mean, it was fine, right? They got a couple spots where I think it's a good need, specifically on the defensive end. And I don't think the Thrash pickup is anything bad by any means. It could be important for 2025. I just don't see him getting a lot of work here in 2024. It's not. I don't think he jumps Tillman, Bell, or any of those guys. Like I said, he comes in as the sixth receiver, in my opinion, unless something changes drastically and he puts on a show in camp, which he could. But
yeah.
he's really going to have to step up and do that because I think he's solidly behind those guys. So I think it was a fine draft. It was just a boring draft. The Browns, their roster is so good in general at this point where 2025 is going to be more of a draft where they're probably going to be trying to get guys who can compete and play immediately because I expect some roster reconstruction next year. For this year, they've got their starters really at every spot. They're pretty set for the most part. So I didn't expect them to go out and have like the greatest draft of everybody. I would say the team in the AFC North who had the best draft was the Pittsburgh Steelers. They did a great job this year. The Browns did what they could do with what they had, but they stayed put. They just took the guys that they liked, and it's not going to wow me, but they didn't need to wow. Whereas the Steelers, I thought they did, and they did that well.
It was a classic Steelers draft. It was basically all offensive line. They took a wide receiver in Roman Wilson. What am I missing? What else did they take? They took a
Peyton
linebacker, Peyton
Wilson,
Wilson. They got
yeah.
him at a great value. I mean, it's annoying as hell to see that team do that, but that's kind of that is what played out this weekend. Fortunately for the Browns, they should have a first round pick again next year, and I say should because they do right now. But even Andrew Berry kind of joked, yeah, for now we have a first round pick. So we'll see how that all transpires. I did want to mention, night two, we did get a chance today to speak to Zach Zinter and Michael Hall Jr. in person, and I thought they were great. They were laughing, having a good time with the whole Ohio State Michigan thing. And there was a lot of jokes made today in the building just about bringing the Ohio State Michigan rivalry like together sort of here. And I do think there's a lot of irony in the fact that Michael Hall Jr. is the player that, again, unintentionally rolled up on Zinter's leg and caused the broken leg that then forced him out. And then Michigan goes on the championship run. And now they're both teammates here. And that was kind of the message that they shared. But kind of a cool side story there. And I'm sure one that we'll all enjoy following along with throughout the season, the uniting of two of the biggest rivals in sports. But I do also want to mention just real quick because this was another point that was brought up towards the end of Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski's press conference together was just that Andrew Berry mentioned, or he was asked rather, about Greg Newsome's fifth-year option. All indications are I think they're going to pick this thing up. I think Andrew, listen, you can never trust everything these guys tell you at their press conferences, full, every word. But I think Andrew Berry's been somewhat transparent about their intentions with the cornerback room, how they feel about those guys. He's talked about how they don't want to give up a premium position like that just for nothing. So I think we can bank on Greg Newsome being here. Maybe something changes at the start of training camp or something. They get wet and wild and they go do something. But I think for the most part, we can expect he's going to be here and he's going to have that fifth-year option picked up, and he'll be on the roster in 2020.
Yeah, I think to touch on what you said about the Hall Zinter thing, the Ohio State Michigan rivalry. Obviously, the hate is real between Michigan and Ohio State fans, and the players when they go up against each other. But ultimately, when Zinter went down, I don't think really people got joy out of that in general.
No.
Zinter is probably one of those Michigan players who I'd say Ohio State fans were like, he's a stand-up guy, he's a character guy, and sure there's always a lot of flack and hate going that way, but there's always a few players that's like, hey, I just like this guy. And Zinter, at least for me being an Ohio State fan as well, was a guy who I had a lot of respect for, not only as a good player, but he was just a good leader, just seemed like a good
Yeah.
quality character, right? And I'm really happy to see him with the Cleveland Browns. And he in the Hall, obviously, yeah, sure they had the rivalry, but as soon as Zinter got picked and Hall was already a member of the Browns, their focus turned to, hey, we're teammates, we're pursuing the same goal. We'd like to win a Super Bowl, right? So all the rivalry, they might joke and mess with each other a little bit, but that's put to the side, right? The main focus is they're Cleveland Browns now. They're working together for the same common goal. They're brothers at this point. So that's the trajectory that they are on. Which was good to hear from their press conference, and obviously
Yeah.
exactly what you would expect.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think the way to sum up this weekend for me, Cole, is I think the Browns took an approach that we all kind of expected, that their roster's in a pretty good place. And I had some people messaging me on social media about this, like,
Mhm.
why didn't they take this guy? Why didn't they take that guy? They got all these holes to fill. And I was kind of, responding back. I just don't see it. Like the 22 starting roles on offense and defense combined are essentially accounted for. Like we know what this team starting roster is going to look like going into, I think, the spring training camp and into the season. Obviously, not accounting for injuries. It really was about sort of filling some holes, thinking about the future. I think Zinter is a good example of that. They're thinking about life without Joel Bitonio one day. Obviously, Michael Hall Jr. could become a great interior pass rusher for them one day, and he doesn't have to start immediately. So I think from like the bird's eye view of this thing for me, I think the Browns did what they had to do in addressing a lot of the sort of deeper holes that they have on the roster and in the depth chart. But yeah, I understand there's some questions about some of the guys on the back end of this day three, but I think overall, like they're kind of just trying to fill cracks. And I think next year, to your point, is going to be the year that they really start sort of looking ahead on all kinds of different things. And okay, we're going to start changing some things up and bringing in some new players if things don't go right, right? Like if they don't go win a Super Bowl, I think then you're talking about next year being a year where you're getting legitimate players who are, okay,
Mhm.
this is a potential starter for us. This is a potential starter for us because I think big changes will be coming next offseason, just where they're at salary cap wise and certain guys kind of aging out. And heck, even maybe questions about Deshaun Watson if he doesn't play at a high level and then quarterback comes back into play. I hope we don't get there and have to have those conversations, but you just never know. Final
Yeah,
thoughts, Cole, from you. I'll give it to you.
yeah, they're really set in general. And to touch on Greg Newsome really quick, I mean, we've written quite a few times in the past couple of weeks about the expectation he's probably not going anywhere. And Andrew Barry had said it recently that all three of my corners, talking about Denzel Ward, MJ Emerson, and Greg Newsome, they're all good in man coverage, and that is not a skill set I want to give up, was what he was quoted saying just the
Yeah.
other week. And I think the fans have been too hard on Greg Newsome, because I think nickel corner is tougher to play than on the outside, because you have to deal with all these crossers over the middle, right? You have to really follow shifty receivers through traffic more so. So I think it's a really tough spot to play. Sure, he had some moments where he gave up the occasional big play, but I think in general he was a lockdown from corner for most of the time. For all the analytics people out there, he graded really just as high as Ward and Emerson in coverage. So there was that stretch there where all three of them were grading like the top five of the cover corners in the NFL in man coverage. So ultimately, I think in general across the board, they're set at every single position, like we talked about. I wouldn't be surprised if multiple of these guys that they selected here today find themselves on the practice squad potentially, because it's hard to crack your way in on a 53-man roster that's almost completely set, almost had no
Yeah.
room. So I almost wondered if Andrew Barry would end up just trading up just to burn a couple picks and only use have like 4 or 5 selections just so he
Yeah.
didn't have as many
I was
guys.
stunned. I was stunned they used all six. I really didn't expect that for sure.
Absolutely, but ultimately, like I said, it's a good problem for them to have. And despite maybe some guys who were out there that I would have loved to have seen be a part of the Browns, um, again, it's not one of those drafts where you really needed people to perform right away. That wasn't the focus this year. Just get through the draft, get a couple guys who can develop, perform, and we'll see what they can do in the future. But ultimately, I think Browns fans should feel good about where the team sits right now.
Yeah, gone are the days, at least for now, that Browns fans have to be hanging on every word, hanging on every pick that comes out of this building behind me. The Browns are in a solid place. They were a playoff team last year. They're hoping to get back there, and a lot of it centers around the quarterback play. We all know that. But that does it for our 2024 NFL draft coverage. Obviously, we'll be back next year with the 2025 draft, but we got a lot that's going to happen before that. And we implore you to continue following along with all of our Browns coverage over at si.com/NFL/Browns. And of course, on the Browns Digest YouTube channel. It's getting dark here before you can't see me anymore. I know Cole wants to get some sleep. We're all very tired. It's been a long couple days, but keep on following along, guys. We appreciate it as always, and we'll catch up with you soon.